Hello everyone, welcome back to Too Sweet MTG and welcome to Cube Tuesdays. In today's episode, we're going to be looking at a bunch of the awesome downshifts from Commander Masters. This set has a ton of really awesome cards for anyone running a Pauper cube, and today we're going to be looking at all of the cool downshifts. Some of these are from uncommon, some of them are even from rare down to common. And we have cards that are banned in other formats which are now legal for you to run in your Pauper cube. So it's probably best if we just jump straight in. First up, we have All That Glitters. This is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact and or enchantment that you control. So this card already sees play in some peasant cubes in a kind of boggle style of deck. And there's definitely a place it could see some play in Pauper. Also in Pauper, you do still have a ton of artifact synergies. Like plenty of the affinity cards are legal in Pauper, and this could go really well in that kind of go wide artifact kind of deck. And that means All the Glitters could have quite a nice place, as it will go in like your aura, boggles, beatdown style of deck, and also your artifact aggro kind of deck. It could find a place in both of those, which is quite nice having that overlap in multiple different decks. But let's move on. Next up, we have Ministrant of Obligation. It is 2 and a white for a creature human cleric with Afterlife 2, which means when it dies, create 2 1/1 white and black spirit creature tokens with flying, and it is of course a 2/1. This is a perfectly fine bit of sacrifice fodder if your Pauper cube is running aristocrats. 3 mana for a 2/1 isn't great, but it effectively being 3 bodies in one card is exactly what those aristocrat decks are looking for. I could see this seeing a fair bit of play, especially if you have aristocrats in your Pauper cube. Moving on to another one for the artifact deck, if you're going that way in white, we have Mearsmith. It is 1 and a white for a creature human artificer. It is a 2/1 with whenever you cast an artifact spell, you may pay 1. If you do, create a 1/1 colorless Myr artifact creature token. So this is definitely another one for the artifact deck. Just in general, cards that can repeatedly make you artifacts and like discount things like your Frogmite or your other affinity creatures are just going to be really good. Like from some of the Pauper cube lists that I've seen, some of them struggle to fully support things like affinity because you're just kind of missing that density of affinity creatures. Something like this plays really well in that deck as it makes you quite an aggressive go wide board while also discounting your affinity creatures. And I mean, this works perfectly fine with a card like All That Glitters. It will just make your creature bigger because you're constantly pumping out 1/1s. It could be quite a cool card. And 2 mana for a piker isn't the end of the world at the end of the day. Moving on to Supply Runners. This is 4 and a white for a 2/2 creature dog. We love that. When Supply Runners enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature that you control. This seems perfectly fine in a couple of places. If your cube is supporting +1/+1 counters, maybe in Selesnya, this seems like a very fine way of putting those counters on top of all of your creatures. And then obviously it also just goes in like a go wide token deck. If this is reliably putting like 3 to 4, hopefully 5 counters across your wide team, you're probably winning that game. This seems like a perfectly fine 5-drop in those kind of decks. And it also is an ETB effect, so you can flicker it, you can ephemerate this. That seems quite scary, actually. Yeah, Supply Runners seems like a perfectly fine card. Moving on to blue now, and we have Cryptic Serpent. It is 5 blue for a 6/5 creature serpent. It has this spell costs 1 less to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So this is effectively a second copy of Tolarian Terror for the kind of red-blue or maybe blue-black spells matters deck. Just having more of these, having more redundancy will really help that archetype out. This is just going to be a very strong card. Like, it's been a hot minute since I've played Pauper Constructed. This just seems like a slam dunk in that Dimir Tolarian Terror deck, as effectively it's just another one of your best creatures. And in Cube especially, just having redundant effects could be really nice, and I could see this seeing a fair bit of play. All right, moving on now to Goliath Sphinx. This is 5 blue for a 8/7 creature Sphinx with flying. This card was downshifted from rare. I can kind of see why. It is just a big dumb idiot, but this is probably the biggest, dumbest idiot that you can play in a blue-white, maybe blue-black control deck in Pauper. Like, it's not super flashy, but it is just big, and if you can get to the point where you can cast it, you will just kill your opponent if they can't answer this. I think this is pretty solid. Again, it's not flashy, but it is just good, I guess. Cool, love it. Which brings us on to Murmuring Mystic. This is 3 and a blue for a 1/5 human wizard with whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 1/1 blue bird illusion creature token with flying. I'm a little bit shocked this one got downgraded. This card is really, really strong. Like, I was running this in my unpowered vintage cube for quite a while, and it was decent in there, but in Pauper cube this seems awesomely strong. Like, the fact that this is only a single blue means it's very splashable, or just at a minimum very easy to cast. Like, we're going to be talking about the blue-red spells deck quite a bit in this video, and this seems phenomenal in that. But it just does so much. Like, this comes down, this stabilizes you. Like, a 1/5 is really hard to deal with, especially in Pauper, and then it just sits there and makes you unblockable beaters every turn. Like, I think this card is going to be super, super strong, and this and a couple of cards cards we'll get to when we get to red are really going to make that blue-red spells deck like really sing. Like, it generally could end up being one of the best decks you can do in Pauper Cube now because of some of these downshifts. Like Murmuring Mystic is going to be really, really good. All right, moving on next to Renowned Weaponsmith. I think this one is quite cute, if not super strong, but I quite like it. It is 1 blue for a 1/3 Human Artificer. It has tap, add colorless, and you can only spend that mana to cast artifact spells or activate abilities of artifacts. And blue and tap, search your library for a card named Heartpiercer Bow or Vial of Dragonfire, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So the top ability of this card is fine. It lets you cast your artifacts a little bit earlier, but it is that bottom ability that I personally find really interesting, especially in like a Pauper Cube, because you have things like Vial of Dragonfire, which this can go get, which is basically kind of like a mini egg that kills something. It's a 2-mana artifact that has 2 and tap it to sacrifice the Vial of Dragonfire to deal 2 damage to target creature. And then the Heartpiercer Bow is 2 generic mana for an equipment, which whenever equipped creature attacks, Heartpiercer Bow deals 1 damage to target creature defending player controls and has equip for 1. So what's nice about these, especially in a draft, is that it's not a great 2-card combo, but it's a very synergistic 2-card combo. If you can get the bow or the vial, effectively, Renowned Weaponsmith says, pay a blue and tap it to go and get a bit of removal. That's pretty good and is a nice little reward for people who have seen that synergy and drafted it together. I'm not saying it's super strong, but it is cool and I quite like it. Next up, we have Shipwreck Dowser. It is 3 blue for a 3/3 creature Merfolk Wizard with prowess, and when it enters the battlefield, return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. This is another one for the, I guess, kind of blue-red spells deck. You play this later in the game, it comes down, returns a spell that you've already cast, so therefore you know you're getting prowess on the next turn, so this is at least attacking for a 4/4, maybe more depending on what you have left in your hand. Ideally, this is getting back a removal spell when it comes in, so that you can clear your opponent's board and swing through with this and try and kill them. It's a decent card that I think will do some solid work in that red-blue spells deck. Okay, moving on, next we have Vizier of Tumbling Sands. This is 2 and a blue for a creature human cleric. It is a 1/3 with tap it to untap another target permanent and has cycling for 1 and a blue. When you cycle Vizier of Tumbling Sands, untap target permanent. So this is a very cool card. I am not sure what this goes into. Maybe it's some kind of combo-y deck, maybe that exists, or maybe there just is a cycling deck that you could put together and this would be a solid role player in that. Yeah, if I'm honest, I generally don't know what type of deck this goes into, but it is a cool card, and just having that instant speed twiddle kind of untapped target permanent is a solid little combat trick. I think you want it in something that's kind of rewarding you for the cycling, but I'm not sure what pieces are currently in Pauper Cube for that. But it's a cool card, thought that was worth mentioning. Next, we have Wind Rider Wizard. It is 2 and a blue for a 2/2 creature human wizard with flying. Whenever you cast an instant, sorcery, or wizard spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Again, another very solid creature for the blue-red spells matters deck. I mean, technically the wizard deck as well. I'm not sure that exists, but just having a loot effect tacked on to every instant or sorcery that you cast seems very nice. And also from looking at a couple of Pauper Cube lists, the Wind Drake body seems to be running rampant in blue 3-drops, so this will fit in perfectly. You can cut the worst one, put this in, and it will boost up that deck very nicely. Okay, moving on to black with Demon's Disciple. It is 2 and a black for a 3/1 creature human cleric with when Demon's Disciple enters the battlefield, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. I could definitely be over-evaluating this card just because obviously planeswalkers are not really going to be a thing in Pauper Cube. Like, I don't think just like the average black deck wants to jam this. But again, if you have Aristocrats, this can go in. Hopefully you're trading like a 1/1 token or like an Afterlife creature with your opponent's 1 good creature. That is obviously the best case scenario for this. If Edict effects are good in your Pauper Cube, then I think this one could see a play. But moving on to a card that will definitely see play, and I am super hyped about. Like, I actually generally might start playing Pauper again because of this card. We have Dread Return in Pauper now. It is 2 black for a sorcery, return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and it has flashback, sacrifice 3 creatures, meaning you can cast it from the graveyard. Mwah! We absolutely love this card. This card is banned in Modern, but is now legal in Pauper. Obviously, the rest of the cards in the format will make it stronger or weaker, but just having this reanimation spell being in the format, I absolutely love. This seems phenomenal in kind of like the Golgari or the Dimir self-mill decks, where you're milling and you're getting creatures into play from the things that you've milled, and then you're putting your big thing into the graveyard, and then your Dread Return goes into the graveyard, and then you flash back by sacrificing the little things and put your big thing into play. This seems phenomenal and an absolute slam dunk in any Pauper Cube. I love this card. I think it's going to be a ton of fun. Next up, we have Drown in Sorrow. It is 1 black for a sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, and you scry 1. There are not a lot of board wipes available in Pauper Cube, and Drown in Sorrow seems like a really solid option. Like, at a bare minimum, it seems like a pretty solid upgrade to something like Eyeblight Massacre. That's the one that gives all non-elf creatures -2/-2 until end of turn, and is 1 more mana. And with this, you also get a scry. This seems pretty good. Control-y decks will absolutely love it, and I think it's going to see a lot of play in Pauper Cube. Moving on now to the card that you are probably going to be dread returning back. We have Lothlith Giant. It is 6 and a black for a 6/5 zombie giant with Undergrowth, which is when Lothlith Giant enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target opponent for each creature card in your graveyard. So this is the payoff for the self-millie Dread Return deck that I was talking about. Like, these 2 cards, I think, really push that archetype to a decent level. Like, this really gives those decks something to build towards and something cool to do. Like, all we need is Spider Spawning to be downshifted to common, and I will be in my happy place forever. To help that deck out even more, you have a card like Maya Triton. It is 1 and a black for a 2/1 creature zombie merfolk with Death Touch, which has, when it enters the battlefield, mill 2 cards and gain 2 life. This is super solid in that self-mill deck because 1, it self-mills you, and then 2, it just comes down and just really holds down the board. No one wants to attack into a 2/1 Death Toucher. You don't have to block their annoying tokens with this. You can trade for a 2, 3, or a 4 drop very happily with this card with that Death Touch. Like, this little self-mill spread I am truly in love with, and I think will be a ton of fun. Moving on to red and to a very impactful card now, we have Guttersnipe. It is 2 and a red for a creature Goblin Shaman. It is a 2/2 with, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Guttersnipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. There are a few other cards like this that ping your opponent when you cast instants or sorceries. I'm not sure how many of them are Pauper legal, but there aren't many, if any, that deal 2 damage to each opponent when you cast them spells. This is another fantastic card in the blue-red spells deck, and it could even be a card that can make Storm work in Pauper, but with that you're basically playing the Guttersnipe first, and then you're playing your cantrips and your draw spells to ping out your opponent for 2 damage each time you cast another spell. You don't need that Storm payoff. Guttersnipe is already in play. That is your Storm payoff. That could be a little bit niche, but Guttersnipe is an awesome card, and I think it's going to be very impactful in Cube. Like, it just kills people. Imagine playing this and then going like Opt, Brainstorm, a couple of other cantrips, and then you play like your Tolarian Terror. Your opponent's just going to be dead. That seems really, really solid. And talking of solid, next we have Sulphurous Blast. It is 2 red for an instant. It deals 2 damage to each creature and each player. If you cast a spell during your main phase, it deals 3 damage to each creature and each player instead. Remember what I was saying about the format lacking board wipes? This will be really, really good in that. Like, there are definitely some red ones that will deal like 1 damage to each creature very easily. But this dealing 3 damage to each creature, that's going to be phenomenal. And there are definitely points where dealing 2 damage at instant speed is going to be really strong as well. Like, Pauper is not a format where you can really run Wrath of God. It's just going to be way too strong. But in Cube, you do need some kind of board wipes to kind of keep aggressive decks in check and make kind of control decks be viable in the first place. This seems like a perfectly solid middle ground, and I think it'll end up being pretty good. Right, next up we have Crash of Rhino Beetles. It is 4 and a green for a 5/5 creature insect with trample, and Crash of Rhino Beetles gets +10/+10 as long as you control 10 or more lands. So this was a rare and it has been downshifted straight to common, which means it's definitely worth talking about it. How strong it is, like, effectively, this is a 99% of the time is going to be a 5-mana 5/5 with trample. Like, the world where this has 15 power and toughness is effectively a world where this is a 10 drop because you're going to need 10 lands in play. Like, it's not reduced by mana dorks or anything like that. Like, this could be a strong card. Like, if a 5/5 trample for 5 mana is good enough to get into Pauper Cube, then this could see play. But it's just a bit dumb and stupid, and like, I don't think it's better than something like a Croton Tusker, which has some added utility as well that you'll actually get use out of. But next we're going to talk about Crawling Infestation. It is 2 and a green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may mill 2 cards, and whenever 1 or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere during your turn, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. This ability annoyingly triggers only once each turn. This is probably one of the cards that will help fuel your Dread Return if you're going to be trying to do that self-mill, go-wide creature token deck in Golgari. This is definitely a underpowered, not fantastic card, but if you have the synergy to kind of bring it together and make these bits work, then I think it could see a place. Moving on next to Rot Shambler. This is 1 and a green for a 1/1 creature fungus. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1 counter on Rot Shambler. So I actually quite like this card. Like the more I'm looking at things nowadays, the more I think Aristocrat decks should be in maybe green. Just because in Pauper you have a ton of cards, especially in green, that kind of make additional tokens when they come in or make tokens when they die. Something like this and like a Brindleshote seems really fun. Brindleshote's the 2-mana 1/1 that when it dies, it becomes a 3/3. That plus this and a sack outlet seems like a perfectly fine way of beating down an opponent and winning a game of Magic. Those are the kind of Pauper decks that I like to play. Maybe Rotch Emblem makes that actually good. It could be fun. And then lastly, on our list, we have Firemind Vessel. It is a 4 generic for an artifact that enters the battlefield tapped and taps for 2 mana of different colors. So we're talking about this primarily because there just aren't a great deal of kind of big artifact ramp at common. There's probably some that I'm definitely missing, but this seems like a pretty solid option. Like if you're trying to support any kind of big mana deck in your Pauper cube, this could now be the choice, and it fixing you for 2 different colors could make like a multicolored deck exist as well. You will have a ton of options at 3 with like various different manalith variants that kind of come in 3 generic and tap for a mana of any color, but you don't have too many options when you go to 4, especially ones that make different colors of mana. Like this could just end up being way too slow, but I think it's a cool card and was definitely worth talking about. Right, I think we are going to end the video there. There were a ton of awesome cards downshifted in this set that I'm super psyched about. Like in terms of just impactful cards, I think this could be one of the best sets for Pauper Cube ever, maybe? Do let me know down in the comments what your favorite downshift was, especially if there's any that I've missed. And a little spoiler to next week, it wasn't just Pauper that got a ton of good stuff. Peasant also got a ton of really sweet cards. So do make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear about our cards for Peasant next week. But until then, I will see you all soon. Goodbye.